In the spring of 2008, a hunter in Gallatin County stumbled upon something half buried in the thawing ground. A rusted tin lunchbox, a set of keys, and a single Polaroid photo. That discovery reopened a missing persons case that had gone cold for 32 years. But no one in the quiet town of Unsolved expected what came next. When the DNA results came back, the name that surfaced belonged to one of their own. This is the story of how Montana's most peaceful family became the center of a nightmare no one saw coming. Subscribe for more cinematic true crime stories. The snow in early April always lingered too long in the shadowed folds of the Bridger Mountains. Beneath the pines, meltwater seeped into the moss and carried the smell of iron and rot through the thawing soil. On April 9, 2008, a retired postal worker named Tom Weaver trudged uphill with his retriever, Molly, looking for shed antlers. He had taken this route every spring for a decade, an easy trail above the old Miller Creek logging road. Molly ran ahead, her golden coat flashing between tree trunks. When she began barking near a half-fallen pine, Tom assumed she'd found a squirrel. But as he drew closer, his boots sank into a patch of ground that gave under his weight, softer than the rest, as if something beneath it had never fully frozen. He bent down and brushed away wet needles. A corner of metal glinted through the muck. It was an old tin lunchbox, rusted at the hinges, the kind that might have once held a peanut butter sandwich and an apple. Beside it lay a ring of corroded keys, 3, tied together with brittle twine. When Tom opened the box, the hinges squealed. Inside were 2 things, a Polaroid photo and a thin silver bracelet, the first letter filmed over with grime so the initials looked like KML. The photograph, cloudy with age, showed a young woman sitting on the hood of a blue pickup truck laughing at the camera. A hand, masculine, ringed with grease, rested lightly on her knee. Molly whimpered. Tom stared at the picture, his pulse ticking in his ears. The face looked familiar, though the features were softened by time. He turned the photo over, reading the faded ballpoint ink on the back. July 1976, by the lake. He knew that name. Everyone in Unsolved did. Rebecca Becky Lance. She'd vanished in the summer of 1976. The same week her engagement to Daniel Mercer had been announced in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle. Tom felt the forest tilt around him. He took out his phone, the old flip kind that struggled for service, and dialed 911. By the time Sheriff Lena Holt arrived at the scene, the afternoon light had turned thin and gold, seeping through the branches like old varnish. Her boots broke through patches of ice, each step releasing the faint smell of wet earth. For 3 decades, Lena had heard the name Becky Lance like a ghost story told by older deputies. Every small town in Montana had one missing girl whose face haunted the bulletin board in the sheriff's office. Faded photograph, handwritten date, the word Unresolved, stamped in red ink. Becky was theirs. She crouched beside the open lunchbox, gloved hands steady, though her breath had quickened. The Polaroid was sealed in a clear evidence sleeve now, its colors half faded, pale denim, sunlight, the trace of a smile. "Found right here," she asked Tom Weaver, who stood a few yards away holding his cap in both hands. "Right where the dog's sittin'," he said. "Didn't dig none, just brushed it off. Figured it looked wrong to be there." Lena nodded, scanning the area. No recent digging, but the ground had clearly settled unevenly. A gentle mound ran along the base of the fallen pine. It could have been anything, or anyone. "Mark it," she told her deputy. "We'll bring in forensics from Bozeman. Don't touch the mound until they're here." The deputy, a young man named Harris, began setting small orange flags around the site. Lena stepped back, looking down the slope toward the faint glimmer of Miller Creek. From here, the nearest road was almost a mile away, perfect for something meant never to be found. She remembered her father talking about Becky. "Sweet girl," he'd said. "Used to help her mama at the diner before she went missing. They said she was hitching to Bozeman, but I never bought it. Lena's radio crackled. Sheriff, this is dispatch. Bozeman Lab says they can have a team out by dusk. You'll want to call Detective Mercer, too. Says he's on his way. Lena froze. Repeat that? Detective Daniel Mercer, Bozeman PD, said he'd like to be there when the scene's processed. Personal interest. A chill threaded down her spine. Mercer. The same man Becky Lance had been engaged to when she vanished. He would have been barely 20 then, still a kid. Now he was a decorated detective, one of Bozeman's finest. Copy that, Lena said carefully. Tell him the site's restricted, but I'll talk to him when he arrives. When she turned back, Tom was still standing there, his retriever pressed against his leg as if sensing the weight of what they'd found. You did the right thing, she told him. I didn't want to. Tom said softly, I wish I'd never found it. Some things are meant to stay buried. Lena looked again at the lunchbox. The initials, KML, didn't match Rebecca's name, but she knew enough about secrets to recognize when a clue was meant to mislead. By the time the forensic team arrived, the sun had dropped below the tree line. Floodlights washed the clearing in sterile white. Cameras clicked. The soft mechanical hum of the ground-penetrating radar filled the silence. Sheriff, one technician called out. We've got density readings under the mound. Multiple anomalies. Could be bone fragments. Lena felt her throat tighten. 32 years of dust, rumor, and silence. All about to come undone. She watched the technicians dig with surgical precision, brushing away soil until a fragment of denim appeared. Then a pale curve of bone. The night air turned colder. One of the younger techs whispered, Christ. Lena knelt beside them, flashlight steady. The remains were curled inward, fetal, as if the person had died trying to hold themselves together. Around the wrist, the faint gleam of a silver bracelet. It matched the one in the lunchbox. Lena stood slowly, her breath fogging in the beam of her flashlight. The forest seemed to hold its breath. She turned toward the sound of approaching footsteps, heavy, deliberate. A man stepped into the light, tall, gray-haired, wearing a Bozeman PD jacket. Detective Mercer? Lena asked. He nodded, his expression unreadable. It's been a long time since anyone said that name, he said quietly, looking past her at the grave. Becky Lance. Lena studied him. His eyes didn't flicker, not even when the body bag was lifted from the earth. Funny thing, Mercer murmured. I always wondered what really happened to her. Lena said nothing. She only watched as he turned away from the grave, his face half lit, calm, too calm, and she knew, without knowing why, that this case was going to break more than just old ground. 3 days later, the snow in Bozeman had turned to a thin gray slush that streaked the edges of the sidewalks. Sheriff Lena Holt stood inside the Gallatin County Forensic Center, watching through a glass partition as the technicians worked over the skeletal remains found near Miller Creek. The lab smelled faintly of disinfectant and cold metal. Beyond the glass, Dr. Evelyn Cross, the county's forensic anthropologist, leaned over the examination table, her gloved hand steady as she brushed fine dust from a cracked femur. She was in her late 50s, tall, sharp-eyed, and known in the state as the Bone Whisperer for her uncanny ability to reconstruct identities from fragments. When she looked up, she met Lena's gaze through the glass and motioned her in. Sheriff, she said as Lena stepped inside, you were right to bring this one quickly. We're looking at a woman between 20 and 25. Based on bone density and fusion, she was likely in her early 20s. That matches Rebecca Lance's age when she disappeared. Any signs of trauma? Lena asked. Multiple, Evelyn said, peeling off her gloves and pointing to the skull. Fracture on the parietal bone. A blow to the head, heavy object, likely post-mortem. But what's odd, she shifted to the ribs. These 3 breaks occurred while she was still alive. Non-fatal, but painful. Beaten? Lena asked quietly. Evelyn nodded. And here's something else. She picked up a small tray. Inside lay the silver bracelet. Cleaned, its engraving visible now under the light. The letters weren't KML, as first thought. Dirt had obscured part of the first letter. It read RML. R, Lena murmured. Rebecca Marie Lance. Evelyn handed her a small envelope. We pulled DNA from the molars. I've sent samples to the state lab for confirmation, but the preliminary test from mitochondrial DNA is conclusive. Sheriff, this is your missing woman. Lena exhaled slowly, the air leaving her lungs like a secret finally released. 32 years, and Becky had been lying under that pine the whole time. Anything else in the grave? Evelyn hesitated. Yes, fragments of cloth, a man's work shirt, and an object we almost missed. She opened another evidence bag. Inside, a rusted wedding ring. The inscription inside was still legible. DM to BL, forever starts now. Lena's pulse quickened. Daniel Mercer's initials. She never made it to the altar, Evelyn said softly. But he did give her a ring. Lena nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. If Mercer had been her fiancé, then he was also the last known person to see her alive. But now, 32 years later, he'd been standing over her grave like a man visiting a stranger's headstone. When Lena left the lab, dusk had fallen over Bozeman. Snow flurries spun through the orange glow of the streetlights. She drove straight to the police department, a squat concrete building that always smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. At the front desk, the officer on duty looked up. Detective Mercer's still in his office. You here to see him? Yes, Lena said. Tell him it's about the Lance case. When she entered Mercer's office, he was seated at his desk, a mug of black coffee cooling beside a stack of case files. He looked tired, but composed. His walls were lined with commendations and framed newspaper clippings. Decades of service, missing person solved, children reunited with families. A hero's resume. Sheriff, he greeted, motioning to a chair. What's the verdict from forensics? You already know, don't you? Lena said evenly. He studied her for a moment, then leaned back. Becky Lance. I had a feeling. You find out how she died? Head trauma, multiple rib fractures, buried shallow. Her bracelet was still on her wrist. Mercer's eyes flickered, a tiny shift that might have been guilt or memory. I remember that bracelet, he said quietly. Gave it to her the night before she disappeared. And the ring? Lena asked. His gaze sharpened. What ring? The one inscribed with your initials. For a second, the air in the office seemed to freeze. Then Mercer smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I gave her a ring, yes. Engagement ring. She must have been wearing it when she left. Why'd she leave, Detective? Mercer rubbed his temple. We had an argument. She wanted to move to California. I wanted to stay. That was the last time I saw her. You never filed a missing persons report, Lena said. He gave a weary sigh. Her mother did. I was 20. You know how that looks back then. A man reports his fiancée missing and suddenly he's a suspect. I told the truth. She left after a fight. Everyone believed she'd run off. Lena stood, eyes locked on his. She didn't run off, Mercer. She was buried a mile from your family's old cabin. For a moment, his face went pale. Then he laughed softly. That cabin's been gone 20 years. My father sold the land after Mom died. Still, Lena said, I'd like to take a look. He leaned back in his chair. You need a warrant for that. I'll get one. When she left his office, her chest felt tight. She didn't yet know what she believed, but she knew how lies aged. They didn't disappear. They hardened, like frost in the ground, waiting for the thaw. That night, Lena sat at her kitchen table, the files spread before her. Old newspaper clippings yellowed with age. Becky Lance's smiling face stared up from the headlines. Local bride-to-be vanishes, 1976. In another photo, Daniel Mercer stood beside her, young and handsome, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. She flipped the clipping over. A smaller headline from 1979 read, "Mercer family suffers tragedy. Cabin fire claims father and brother." Lena stared at the date. 2 years after Becky vanished. She took a long sip of cold coffee, heart pounding. Every case started with a single question. Hers was simple. Had Becky's death been the beginning of Mercer's tragedy, or the reason for it? Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. In the dark reflection of the glass, Lena saw her own face, pale and drawn, and behind it, just for a second, the ghostly smile of a girl on the hood of a blue truck. The Mercer property lay 20 miles north of Wilsall, tucked against the foothills where the pine forest thinned into open pasture. The county record still listed the land under Daniel Mercer's late father's name, though a notation from 1979 read, "Structure destroyed by fire. Cause undetermined." Sheriff Lena Holt arrived just after sunrise. Frost glazed the grass, and the sky had the pale, unforgiving blue of early April. She parked beside the rusted gate, the hinges squealing as she pushed it open. Beyond, a faint trail cut through sagebrush toward a low rise where the Mercer cabin once stood. The ground there was barren, a circle of gray ash and charred timbers half buried under decades of needles. Only the old stone chimney remained, crooked but intact, like a memorial no one had the heart to tear down. Her deputy, Harris, joined her, camera in hand. "Strange place for a family cabin," he said. "Feels like the middle of nowhere." "That's the point," Lena replied. She crouched near the chimney base. Even after all these years, the soil was still stained dark from the fire. She brushed at something metallic half buried in the ash, a melted hinge, maybe part of a door. Then, as the wind shifted, she caught a faint, unnatural smell. Rust, oil, and something sour. "Ma'am," Harris called. "You might want to see this." He stood near what looked like a shallow depression behind the ruins. The earth there was softer, darker, as though it had been turned more recently. He pointed to the edge of a half-collapsed concrete well pit. "Radar scan picked up something here," he said. "Old piping, maybe." Lena peered inside. Water glimmered faintly at the bottom. Around the rim she saw the corroded remains of a ladder, and something else, barely visible beneath the waterline. "Metal?" Harris asked. "No," Lena said. "Bone." They radioed the forensic team, who arrived by mid-morning. Under the gray light, the crew set up tarps and flood lamps, their boots crunching in the frost. One of the techs lowered a small retrieval hook and brought up a fragment, ivory-colored, cleanly broken. Another bone followed, then a sliver of fabric clinging to it. "Smells like oil residue," one technician muttered. "Could have been preserved by the cold and chemicals." By noon, they had uncovered what appeared to be 2 distinct sets of remains, tangled together at the bottom of the well. Lena watched as the evidence bags filled, each labeled unidentified male number 1 and unidentified male number 2. Her thoughts flashed to the old headline, "Cabin fire claims father and brother." She turned to Harris. "We'll need to check the death certificates. See if either body was ever recovered back then." Harris nodded. "You think these are them?" "Maybe," Lena said. "But maybe the fire didn't claim them. Maybe it hid them." That afternoon, she drove back to Bozeman through the narrow highway that carved between the hills. The wind howled across the plains, carrying with it the faint scent of pine smoke and thawing mud. By the time she reached the sheriff's office, her phone had already lit up with messages from the forensics lab. Evelyn Cross again. "We've got results," Evelyn said when Lena called. "The 2 sets of remains are male, yes, adult. One approximately in his 40s, the other early 20s. Both died before the fire. Signs of blunt force trauma to the skull. And, Sheriff, she paused, we recovered dental fragments. The younger man's dental work matches records from the late 1970s. Lena's heart thudded. Whose records? Evelyn took a breath. Peter Mercer, Daniel Mercer's younger brother. Lena gripped the steering wheel. And the older one? Still testing, but based on the age, likely their father, Robert Mercer. A silence hung between them, heavy as stone. Evelyn continued, voice low. That means both men died before that cabin burned. Someone set that fire to hide them. Lena's eyes stayed fixed on the empty road ahead. And that someone might have been their only surviving family member. At the Bozeman PD that evening, Lena requested access to the 1979 fire report. The clerk on duty looked uneasy but complied, handing her a thin manila folder smelling of dust and old glue. The report was brief. Single paragraph noting complete structural loss, suspected electrical fault, and no remains recovered due to intensity of fire. It had been signed by a rookie firefighter named Daniel Mercer. Her stomach sank. She walked to the evidence room where the old case files from missing persons were kept in gray steel drawers. After a few minutes of searching, she found Becky Lance's file. Inside, she noticed a faded index card, an interview note from July 1976, written by the original sheriff. Interview. Daniel Mercer. Stated Becky left after argument. Mentioned she planned to drive to California. Appeared cooperative but nervous. No follow-up. In the margin, someone had scribbled later in blue pen. Brother Pete confirmed he saw Becky get into Dan's truck that night. Lena sat back in the chair, the old card trembling in her fingers. She could see the picture forming, not yet sharp, but emerging like a photograph in developer fluid. Daniel Mercer, the respected detective, engaged to a woman who vanished, brother and father dead in a mysterious fire. Now, decades later, he'd been the first to show up at the scene of her uncovered grave. She closed the file and looked out the office window. Night had fallen, the street lamps casting long, pale reflections on the wet asphalt. Her phone buzzed. A text from Harris. Need to see this. Pulled phone logs from Mercer's home line in '79. Last call made from cabin landline. July 14, 1976. 8:32 p.m. dialed Lance residence. Lena stared at the screen. That was the night Becky vanished. She leaned back, the chair creaking. Outside, the storm clouds gathered again over the valley. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. A low, patient growl that seemed to echo the unearthed ghosts of the Mercer land. The morning after the well discovery, Sheriff Lena Holt parked in front of the Bozeman Police Department. The April light had a metallic edge, bright but cold. She'd barely slept. The weight of what she now knew felt like a lead weight under her ribs. Inside, Detective Daniel Mercer's office door was slightly ajar. He was at his desk, sleeves rolled to his elbows, typing a report. To anyone else, he looked ordinary. Another veteran cop starting his day. To Lena, he looked like a man sitting calmly inside a burning house, pretending not to smell the smoke. "Detective," she said, stepping into the doorway. He looked up, polite surprise flickering across his face. "Sheriff Holt." "You're up early." "So are you," she replied. He gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Coffee?" She shook her head. "I just came from the forensic lab." Something shifted in his posture. Not much, just a tightening of the jaw. "Find something new?" "Two things, actually." She placed a file on the desk, sliding it toward him. "The remains of your brother Peter and your father Robert. They weren't killed in that cabin fire, Detective. They were dead before it started." Mercer didn't reach for the file. His eyes, blue-gray and steady, fixed on hers. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation," Lena said quietly. It's a fact. He leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. You're saying someone killed my family, buried Becky near our land, and then burned the cabin? And after 30 years, you think I'm connected? I think you were the only one who survived, Lena said. Silence filled the room. The hum of the fluorescent light sounded louder than it should have. Finally, Mercer exhaled. Long and slow. I was 22. I left that cabin the night before the fire. I'd argued with my dad about Becky. He thought I was throwing away my future over a girl. He gave a bitter smile. Maybe he was right. Lena studied him. What about your brother? Pete? Mercer's voice softened. He adored Becky. Everyone did. He was younger, impulsive. The last time I saw them both, they were sitting on the porch talking. I went for a drive to clear my head. When I came back the next morning, the cabin was gone. Gone? Burned to the ground, he said. Fire crews said it was electrical. I buried 2 empty coffins. Lena let the silence linger. And you never questioned that? Mercer's eyes met hers. You ever lose everything, Sheriff? Family, fiancé, future, all in the same year? After a while, you stop asking questions. You just keep going. The room felt colder. Lena rose. For what it's worth, she said, we'll find out who killed them. All of them. As she turned to leave, Mercer's voice stopped her. Sheriff. She glanced back. Whatever you think happened back then, he said quietly, you're looking at the wrong Mercer. That evening, Lena met with Dr. Evelyn Cross again in her office at the Forensic Center. The lab lights made the steel surfaces gleam like ice. Evelyn handed her a folder. I ran additional testing on the fire victims, she said. You were right to suspect foul play. The older man, Robert Mercer, suffered blunt force trauma from a hammer or similar object. But the younger one, Peter, had fractures consistent with defensive wounds. He fought back. Lena's stomach tightened. So, a struggle. Yes. And something else. Evelyn turned another page, revealing photographs of bone fragments. Both men died within hours of each other. And Sheriff, traces of accelerant were found in the bone pores. Whoever killed them set the fire immediately afterward. Trying to hide the bodies, Lena said. Evelyn nodded. One more thing. I found something embedded in Peter's jawbone. Metallic, circular, dental crown. She handed over a small bag with a rusted piece of metal. Stamped MT76. It's a partial from Bozeman Dental Clinic. Same manufacturer used by a patient named Rebecca Lance. Lena frowned. Becky's crown? Evelyn nodded. Fragment of it, likely transferred during the struggle. I'd say Peter Mercer had contact with her close to her death. The realization hit hard. He might have killed her. Or tried to stop someone else from doing it, Evelyn said. Lena felt a chill crawl up her neck. And then his father intervened. Family secrets, buried in the ash. 2 days later, Lena returned to Wilsall. The small town was buzzing again, the news spreading faster than wildfire. Sheriff reopens 1976 disappearance. Locals gathered at the diner, their voices hushed but eager. She met Irene Lance, Becky's younger sister, now in her 40s, at a booth near the window. Irene's hands were clasped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. I knew she didn't run away, Irene said softly. Becky loved it here. She wouldn't have left without telling me. Did she ever mention trouble with the Mercers? Lena asked. Irene hesitated. Their father, Robert, he was strict. Didn't think Becky was good enough for Daniel. She used to cry about it sometimes, said she was scared of him. But Daniel always defended her. I thought he was a good man. Do you know if Becky spent time alone with Peter? She frowned. Maybe once or twice. He was different, quieter, followed Becky around like a shadow. Did she ever seem afraid of him? Irene's brow furrowed. Not afraid exactly. But she said once that Peter looked at her in a way that made her skin crawl. Lena's stomach turned. When did she say that? a few days before she vanished. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from the mountains. Lena leaned back, the picture sharpening in her mind. Becky, cornered between two brothers, one protective, one possessive. A father furious about their relationship. Then the sudden disappearance, followed by a fire that wiped them all from the record. She stood. "Thank you, Irene. You've helped more than you know." As she stepped outside, her phone buzzed. A message from Harris. "Got a hit on an old storage locker under Mercer's name. Opened in 1977, never closed. You'll want to see this." Lena stared at the text, her breath misting in the cold air. Somewhere between the cabin's ashes and that locker lay the truth. A truth that someone had buried not just once, but 3 times. She started her truck, headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. The radio static filled the cab, but over it, she thought she heard something else. The faint echo of a woman's laughter from an old photograph, carried on the wind like memory. The Bozeman Self-Storage Depot sat on the outskirts of town, an aging complex of corrugated metal units and cracked asphalt. The sign at the entrance creaked in the wind, the paint flaking off to reveal bare metal underneath. Sheriff Lena Holt arrived just after dusk with her deputy, Harris. The sky was bruised purple, and the air smelled faintly of rain. They parked near Unit 112. Daniel Mercer, still printed in faded black on the rental record. According to the clerk, the bill had been paid automatically every year since 1977. 31 years, Harris muttered, flashing his flashlight on the rusted padlock. Whatever's in here, he didn't want it found. Lena nodded. "Cut it." Harris snapped the lock with bolt cutters, the sound sharp in the quiet. The metal door rattled as they rolled it upward, the hinges squealing like something waking after a long sleep. The smell hit first. Old paper, oil, mildew. The flashlight beam swept across the interior. Cardboard boxes stacked waist-high, an old wooden chest, and something draped under a heavy tarp in the back. Lena stepped inside slowly. Her boots left faint prints in the dust. On the nearest box, she could still read the black marker label. 1976, personal. She opened it carefully. Inside were photo albums, brittle letters, and a cracked leather journal. The pages smelled faintly of smoke. The handwriting was neat but forceful, the kind of script taught in parochial schools decades ago. At the top of the first page, R.M. Journal, June 1976. Rebecca Marie Lance. Lena flipped carefully through the pages, her heart pounding. June 9th. Danny's father doesn't want us to marry, says I'm too soft. He told me if I stay near their family, I'll regret it. Danny's trying to calm him down. June 21st. Peter came by again. He said he'd drive me to Bozeman if I wanted to leave. I told him no. He looked angry, like I'd insulted him. Danny doesn't know he's been coming here. July 13th. Danny and I fought tonight. He said I've been leading Pete on. I swear I haven't. I'm scared of how Danny looked at me when he left. He said I'd be sorry if I made him look like a fool. July 14th. I heard someone outside my window. Sounded like breathing. I called out, but no answer. I'm going to the cabin tomorrow to make peace. Maybe then this will end. The last line trailed off mid-sentence, the ink smudged. Lena closed the journal, her hands trembling. The dates matched the night of Becky's disappearance. "Sheriff," Harris said softly from the back of the unit, "you need to see this." He'd pulled the tarp away from the object in the corner, a blue 1975 Ford pickup tailgate, detached and leaning against the wall. The paint was chipped, but on the back someone had scrawled in faded red spray paint, "Forgive me." Beside it stood a small steel container, padlocked but brittle from rust. Harris pried it open. Inside were items sealed in plastic bags, A hammer, a Polaroid camera, and a wedding dress, yellowed but untouched by time. The camera still had film in it. Lena's throat went dry. "Bag everything." They worked in silence for nearly an hour, photographing each item before sealing it for transport. When Lena finally stepped outside, night had fallen completely. The wind carried the distant hum of the highway, the kind of low, endless sound that made a person feel small against the world. Harris shut the door and replaced the lock with an evidence tag. "You think Mercer remembers any of this?" "He remembers," Lena said. "The question is whether he's been pretending to forget." The next morning, the forensics lab processed the items. Evelyn Cross called Lena before noon. "The hammer," Evelyn said, "matches the trauma pattern on both Robert and Peter Mercer's skulls." And there's something else. Lena gripped the phone tighter. "Go on." "On the handle, beneath the rust, partial latent prints. They're degraded and mixed. One appears male and is consistent with Daniel Mercer. The other is female, but too partial to identify at this stage." "So, Daniel's on there?" "Consistent for Daniel, yes. The female trace is inconclusive for single-source ID until we have more comparisons." Lena blinked. "Who?" "His mother." The revelation sat between them like a bomb. "She died before the fire, didn't she?" Lena asked quietly. "No record of death," Evelyn said. "Daniel reported her missing 2 weeks after the fire. But there's no burial, no certificate, nothing." Lena felt a coldness spread through her. "We're not dealing with a triple homicide," she murmured. "We're dealing with 4. That evening, she drove back to Mercer's house. The detective lived alone on the outskirts of Bozeman, a modest ranch-style home surrounded by pine trees. Light glowed from one window. When she knocked, it took him a moment to answer. He looked older than he had 3 days earlier, shadows under his eyes, his face pale. "Sheriff," he said softly, "you don't waste time." "I found your storage locker," Lena said. His gaze didn't flicker. "You got a warrant, I assume." "I did. And your fiancé's journal, a hammer with your prints, a wedding dress." For a moment, something behind his eyes broke, a flicker of grief, raw and unguarded. Then he looked away. "She loved that dress," he murmured. "Why'd you keep it?" "Because it was the only thing that didn't burn." The words hung heavy in the air. "Daniel," Lena said carefully, "I need to know what happened that night." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured toward the dark living room. "Come in, Sheriff. If we're going to dig up ghosts, might as well do it right." Inside, the room smelled faintly of coffee and pine cleaner. Framed photographs lined the mantel, commendations, family pictures, and one faded black-and-white photo of a woman standing in front of the old Mercer cabin, smiling. "Your mother?" Lena asked. He nodded. "Evelyn Mercer. She raised us after Dad started drinking. He poured himself a glass of water but didn't drink it. The night Becky died, my family broke apart. That's the truth you've been chasing." Lena's voice was steady. "Tell me." He looked up, his eyes hollow. "It wasn't me who killed her. But I watched it happen." Rain tapped against the windows of Daniel Mercer's house as if it, too, were waiting for him to speak. The living room light was low, amber and soft. Lena sat across from him at the kitchen table, notebook open but untouched. Mercer turned the glass of water in his hands, watching the reflection tremble. "You want to know what happened in July '76? Then you have to start a week earlier." He drew a long breath. "Dad had a temper," he began. "He worked the mines near Butte, drank hard, came home harder. Mom kept the house quiet, kept Pete and me out of the way. Becky was the first person who ever stood up to him. She told him she wouldn't let him run our lives. That's when he decided she was trouble." His voice thinned. "That week, everything was coming apart. Becky wanted to leave town, said we could start over somewhere else. I told her we'd talk at the cabin, neutral ground, no one to interrupt. But Pete heard us. He thought I was taking her there to end it. Lena kept her gaze steady. "You three went to the cabin that night?" "4 of us," Mercer said. "Mom was there too. She'd gone up earlier to keep the peace." He leaned back, staring past her, into memory. July 14th, 1976, 8 p.m. The cabin smelled of kerosene and cedar. Becky sat on the porch steps, the evening light catching the white of her dress. Not the wedding dress, just summer cotton. Daniel remembers the way she laughed when the moths circled the lantern. He remembers thinking he'd marry her no matter what his father said. Then headlights appeared through the trees. His father's truck, Pete riding shotgun. "What are you doing here?" Daniel had asked. "Finishing what you started," his father growled. Mercer's hands trembled. He pressed his palms flat against the table. Dad was drunk. He started shouting. Said Becky was turning brothers against each other. Pete tried to calm him down, but Dad hit him. Becky screamed. I stepped between them, and Dad swung the hammer he'd brought from the truck. It caught Pete first. Then Mom ran in from the kitchen, tried to pull him back. He hit her too. The room fell silent, except for the rain. Lena's throat tightened. "And Becky?" Mercer stared at the tabletop. "She tried to run." Dad went after her, still holding the hammer. I don't remember grabbing the rifle, but I must have. The next thing I heard was the shot. He paused, the words catching. Dad fell. Becky was crying, holding Mom. There was blood everywhere. Pete wasn't moving. What happened next? I wanted to get help. But Mom, she was fading fast. She looked at me and said, "Don't let this shame kill what's left of us." She made me promise to make it look like an accident. To protect the family, so you set the fire. Mercer nodded slowly. I dragged their bodies inside. Becky helped me. She said she'd tell the police the truth later, that it wasn't my fault. But before we could leave, she saw Pete. She touched his face, and something snapped in her, or maybe in me. I told her we had to go. She said she couldn't, that she needed to bury him properly. His eyes went distant. We argued. I pushed her. She hit her head on the hearth. It was fast. I didn't mean... He broke off, voice cracking. I buried her near the creek. Then I burned the cabin. Everything after that was just noise. Questions, funerals, years Lena's pen lay forgotten on the table. You carried this for 30 years, she said quietly. Mercer gave a hollow laugh. Carried it. I lived in it. Every case I solved, every missing person I found, I was trying to dig her up without touching the shovel. They sat in silence, rain whispering against the roof. Finally, Lena said, "Why come to the dig site last week?" He met her eyes. "Because I knew you'd find her, and I couldn't let someone else tell her story. Daniel, you know I have to take this statement formally." "I know." He looked strangely calm now. "I'm ready." She stood, radioing dispatch. "This is Sheriff Holt, requesting a unit to my location for a custodial pickup." One male, voluntary. When she ended the call, Mercer asked softly, "Do you think she forgave me?" Lena hesitated. "Maybe finding her was your way of asking." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Then I hope she heard me." Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder. Mercer placed his badge on the table. "Tell them to treat her grave with respect," he said. "She deserved better." When the patrol car's light strobed across the living room, Lena watched him stand, shoulders squared, and walk out into the rain. For the first time since the case began, she felt no satisfaction. Only the cold ache that comes when truth finally arrives and finds no victors, only survivors. Rain kept falling through the night, washing the ash smell from the air. By morning, Bozeman felt muted, as though the whole town had lowered its voice. Sheriff Lena Holt watched from behind the glass of the interview room as Daniel Mercer sat at the table, hands folded. No lawyer, no defiance. His badge and service pistol lay in a sealed evidence tray beside the door. The weight of 32 years rested in the curve of his shoulders. Deputy Harris stepped up beside her. "He hasn't asked for a phone call," he whispered. "He's not fighting it," Lena replied. "He's finished fighting." They entered the room together. Mercer looked up, managed a faint, weary smile. "Morning, Sheriff. You ready to make it official?" He nodded. "Let's get it on record." The camera light blinked red. Lena read the date and time, then began the formal statement. Mercer recounted what he'd told her the night before. The argument, the hammer, the shot, the fire. His voice didn't waver until he reached the part about Becky. "She hit the hearth," he said quietly. "I panicked. I didn't check for a pulse." "Why bury her?" Lena asked gently. "Because I couldn't burn her too." When the recording ended, Mercer signed the transcript, his signature deliberate and small. "There," he murmured. "The truth." Lena stood. "Detective Mercer, I'm placing you under arrest for the deaths of Rebecca Lance, Robert Mercer, and Peter Mercer, and for arson and evidence tampering related to the Mercer cabin fire, pending review by the county attorney." He nodded, almost relieved. "Feels lighter already." Harris led him from the room. For a moment, Lena stayed behind, staring at the empty chair, the small puddle of rainwater Mercer had carried in on his boots, slowly evaporating on the floor. Outside the station, reporters were already gathering. Someone had leaked word that the Montana cold case had cracked, and the suspect was one of their own. Cameras flashed as Lena stepped to the microphones. "Yesterday evening," she said evenly, "Detective Daniel Mercer of the Bozeman Police Department voluntarily surrendered to authorities in connection with the 1976 disappearance of Rebecca Lance and the deaths of the Mercer family. We're coordinating with the state attorney's office to ensure a full and transparent investigation." Questions shouted over one another. Was he acting alone? Is the fiancé's body confirmed? What about motive? Lena kept her face composed. Those answers will come through evidence, not speculation. She returned inside to find Evelyn Cross waiting by her office door, lab coat still damp from the drive. The forensic pathologist looked grim. "We finished analyzing the last set of remains from the cabin site," she said, lowering her voice. "There's something you need to hear before you finalize the report." They went into the office. Evelyn closed the door and set a folder on the desk. "You remember the female DNA trace on the hammer? You assumed it belonged to Evelyn Mercer, Daniel's mother. That's what the database matched," Lena said. Evelyn opened the folder. "It's only a partial match. Half the genome. The rest belongs to someone younger. Statistically, that means a direct descendant." Lena frowned. "Daniel's daughter?" "He never had children," Evelyn reminded her. "Which leaves one possibility. Rebecca Lance was pregnant when she died." The words settled like dust in the air. Lena sank slowly into her chair. "He didn't know?" "I can't say. But fetal bone fragments were found mixed with the soil samples from her burial site." Evelyn's voice softened. "That's why she met him that night, Sheriff. She was going to tell him." By afternoon, Lena sat again across from Mercer in holding. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed but lucid. "There's something I didn't ask you," she began. "When you saw Becky that night, did she tell you she was expecting?" He froze. The silence stretched long enough for the fluorescent light to buzz audibly above them. "No," he said finally. "No, she didn't." Lena watched his face carefully. A flicker, disbelief, then dawning comprehension. "She was pregnant," he whispered. "Yes." He leaned back, as if the air itself had turned to glass around him. "I killed my child, too." Lena wanted to say something, anything, but words failed. There were moments even a law officer could not translate into language. He rubbed his eyes with cuffed hands. "I thought burying her was mercy. I told myself the truth would only hurt people, but it hurt everyone anyway." Lena closed her notebook. There's still time to make amends. You can help us locate every piece of your story. Mercer shook his head. Different story, Sheriff. But I'll help you find every piece of mine. That evening, Lena drove alone to the mountains north of town, following Mercer's directions to the old Mercer property. The rain had stopped. Mist clung to the trees. She parked by what remained of the family's pasture, now wild with thistle. She imagined Becky standing there decades ago, holding a secret she never got to share. She thought of Daniel, a man haunted by silence, and of the child who had never been given a name. Kneeling, Lena pressed her palm to the damp earth. "You can rest now," she whispered. A coyote howled somewhere beyond the ridge. The sound echoed down the valley, lonely and endless. When she rose, the first light of dawn brushed the horizon. Another case closed, but not the kind that left you clean. Truth never really did. 6 months later, Bozeman County Courthouse looked like a fortress besieged by ghosts. Reporters crowded the marble steps, cameras poised for the story that had consumed the entire state. Detective confesses to 1976 family murders. Inside, Sheriff Lena Holt took a seat in the back row of the courtroom, her badge tucked beneath her jacket. She wasn't here in uniform. She was here as a witness, but also as a woman who had carried someone else's truth until it broke. Daniel Mercer was led in wearing a dark suit instead of jail orange. A concession, the defense said, to his 30 years of service. He looked thinner, his hair almost white, but there was a quiet steadiness in his eyes. At the prosecution table, Assistant District Attorney Rachel Voss arranged her files with precision. She was young, sharp, ambitious, the kind who didn't believe in gray. Her voice carried easily through the courtroom when she began her opening remarks. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, "this case is not about the cold wind of Montana or the passage of time. It's about truth. Truth delayed, truth denied, and finally, truth confessed." In 1976, Daniel Mercer killed 4 members of his family and his fiancée, then buried the evidence beneath a fire he called an accident. For 32 years, he wore a badge. For 32 years, he investigated others while hiding his own crime. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The defense attorney, Greg Saunders, a stoic man in his 60s, countered calmly. "My client has already confessed. This trial is not about whether he did it. It's about why he did it, and whether mercy has a place in justice." Lena watched Mercer as the first witnesses took the stand. Forensic technicians described the DNA, the hammer, the journal. Evelyn Cross testified next, her professional detachment tempered by sadness. "Time doesn't erase truth," she said, her voice clear. "It only buries it until someone cares enough to dig." Then it was Lena's turn. She swore in, then met the eyes of the jury, 12 strangers who would weigh decades of pain in the space of a few days. "I reopened the Lance case after remains were found near the old Mercer property," she said. "Detective Mercer cooperated fully from the beginning. He didn't run. He didn't hide. When he confessed, it wasn't to escape guilt. It was because he'd lived with it too long." "Sheriff," the prosecutor asked, "did he ever show remorse?" Lena hesitated. "Every moment I knew him." When she stepped down, Mercer gave her a small nod. Gratitude, perhaps, or farewell. By the 3rd day, the jury had heard enough. They'd seen photos of the burned cabin, Becky's diary, even the tiny bone fragments Evelyn had identified as fetal remains. Mercer took the stand last. His lawyer didn't object. He wanted the truth heard in his own voice. "Mr. Mercer," the prosecutor began, "you served as a detective for 3 decades. How does a man live with something like this and still wear a badge?" He took a long breath. "You learn to live 2 lives, one that solves crimes, one that hides them. Eventually they blur together. You claim the killings weren't premeditated," she pressed. "But you brought a gun that night, didn't you?" I did, he admitted. But I brought it for protection, not murder. My father's rage was unpredictable. She stepped closer. And when you buried Rebecca Lance, did you know she was carrying your child? He closed his eyes. No. And if you had? I'd have burned with the cabin, he said softly. A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the reporter stopped typing. The prosecutor stood silent for a moment, then returned to her table. No further questions. When the defense took over, Saunders guided his client gently. Mr. Mercer, why did you confess now, after all these years? Mercer's voice wavered but held. Because she deserved to be found. And because I didn't want to die the same kind of coward my father was. Do you expect forgiveness? No, he said. Just understanding. The attorney nodded and rested his case. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, their faces were pale, solemn. We, the jury, find the defendant, Daniel Mercer, guilty of manslaughter in the deaths of Robert, Peter, and Evelyn Mercer, and second-degree murder in the death of Rebecca Lance. No cheers, no gasps, just silence. The judge, an old man with kind eyes, leaned forward. Mr. Mercer, you have robbed 4 people of their lives and 1 unborn child who never had a chance. But you have also lived 30 years in service to others, carrying the weight of your own crime. The court sentences you to 25 years, eligible for parole after 15. Mercer bowed his head. Thank you, Your Honor. Lena closed her eyes. Justice, perhaps, but not peace. That evening, she visited him one last time before his transfer to the state penitentiary in Deer Lodge. The holding cell was quiet, lit only by a narrow window. You're leaving tomorrow, she said. I heard. I wanted to tell you something before you go. She hesitated. Evelyn Cross found evidence that Becky was pregnant. He looked up sharply. You told the court? No, she said. I thought you deserved to hear it first. For a long time, he said nothing. Then quietly, that's the hardest truth of all. She was going to tell you that night, Lena said. He nodded slowly, tears welling but not falling. I wish she had. Maybe everything would have been different, Lena stood. Sometimes the only mercy left is in telling the story right. He managed a faint smile. Then do that for me, Sheriff. Tell it right. I will. When she left, the corridor outside the cell block was empty. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed like a final punctuation mark on a tragedy that had begun before she was even born. Autumn crept early into the Gallatin Valley that year. Aspen leaves had already turned to pale coins of gold, spinning through the wind like lost promises. Sheriff Lena Holt had thought the Mercer case would settle into history after the sentencing. Yet 6 months later, she found herself still waking at night to the smell of smoke that wasn't there. One Thursday morning, an email from the state records office landed in her inbox. Subject line, Uncatalogued box, Mercer fire, 1979. The message was brief. Recovered during archive digitization. Contains photographs and film reels from original investigation. Lena stared at the screen for a long time, then grabbed her keys. The records facility sat behind the old courthouse, windowless, cold, and full of the hum of fluorescent lights. The archivist, a young man in horn-rimmed glasses, met her at the counter. You reopened that case, right? He asked. These were misfiled under Miller Creek accident. Looks like fire department materials. He wheeled out a gray box labeled Mercer Cabin, July 1979. Dust puffed into the air when Lena lifted the lid. Inside lay a half-dozen black-and-white photos, several water-stained documents, and a small canister of 8mm film. She examined the photos first. The Mercer property still smoking, firefighters standing knee-deep in ash. But one image froze her. The outline of a 4th body being carried from the site. She frowned. There should have been only 2, Robert and Peter. Can you digitize the film? She asked. The archivist nodded. "Give me 10 minutes." While she waited, Lena flipped through the documents. A half-burned field report caught her eye. Body recovered near secondary structure, female, partially burned, transferred to county coroner pending ID. There was a signature at the bottom. D. Mercer, volunteer fire crew. Her breath caught. When the archivist returned with the converted footage, they loaded it onto a monitor. Grainy images flickered. Firefighters dragging hoses. The ruined chimney standing like a gravestone. Then, at the 20-second mark, a firefighter turned toward the camera, helmet askew. Even through the blur, Lena recognized Daniel Mercer's face. Behind him, 2 men carried a stretcher. On it lay a shape small and slight, wrapped in a blanket. The caption on the frame's edge, handwritten in ink, read, "Recovered, E. Mercer." Lena's pulse thundered in her ears. Evelyn Mercer hadn't vanished after the fire. She had been found, and quietly erased from the record. By late afternoon, Lena was driving north again toward the old Mercer land. The road was rough, pitted with ruts. The sun hung low, casting long bars of light through the trees. She parked near the collapsed chimney, the same place where the investigation had begun almost 2 years earlier. The forest had grown around it, as if trying to reclaim what it once rejected. Kneeling beside the well pit, she pulled from her coat pocket a copy of the coroner's inventory from 1979, most of it illegible, except for one line, "Transferred to temporary county morgue. Release requested by family representative. Daniel Mercer." She looked toward the horizon. "You moved her, didn't you?" she murmured. "All of them, but not far." Something metallic glinted among the weeds near the base of the chimney. She brushed away the leaves. A locket, its clasp broken, half melted from fire. Inside, beneath soot, was a photograph of a young woman, Evelyn Mercer, holding 2 boys barely into their teens. On the opposite side was a line etched in faint script. "Protect them, even from each other." Lena felt a chill crawl up her arms. The locket wasn't just a keepsake, it was a message. That night she drove to Deer Lodge Prison. The warden allowed her 10 minutes. Mercer sat across the glass divider, his expression a mixture of surprise and fatigue. "Sheriff," he said, voice rough. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." "I found something," she said. "A film reel from the fire. Your mother's body was recovered, Daniel. The report says you signed for her release." He went very still. "That's impossible." "I've seen the footage." For the first time since she'd known him, true panic flickered across his face. "Then it wasn't her," he whispered. "What do you mean?" "My mother was alive when I left. She was hurt, but breathing. I couldn't stay. The fire was spreading. If someone found a woman's body, it wasn't her." "Then who was it?" Mercer swallowed hard. "There was a neighbor. A woman who helped Mom sometimes. Her name was Mary Callan. She came that night, tried to stop the fight. I never saw her after. I thought she'd run. Lena felt her chest tighten. Mary Callan filed a missing person report 2 months later. It was closed for lack of evidence. Mercer pressed a hand against the glass. "Sheriff, whatever you found out there, it isn't finished. Someone helped me bury the truth. And it wasn't me." The line clicked. Time was up. The guard touched Lena's shoulder gently. Outside, the night smelled of rain again. She looked back at the prison lights fading behind her, then at the endless dark of the Montana plains. Somewhere between the ashes of the cabin and the reel of forgotten film lay another story, one even Mercer hadn't known he'd written. She started the engine, headlights cutting through the mist. The tires crunched over gravel as she whispered to herself, "Ghosts don't rest." Not until every name is spoken. The following week brought sleet and a gray sky that flattened everything it touched. Sheriff Lena Holt spent most of it buried in records. piecing together the ghost of a woman whose name had slipped out of Montana's memory. Mary Callan, age 38 in 1976, divorced, lived 2 miles down the ridge from the Mercer property, known for taking in foster kids and helping elderly neighbors with laundry runs into Bozeman, the kind of person small towns depended on but rarely remembered. Her file in the archives was a handful of notes, reported missing by sister, August 1976. Case closed, January 1977. Presumed deceased in Mercer fire. But there was no body tagged under her name, no dental record match, and, most telling, no formal statement from the person who had signed that presumed deceased line. The signature, smeared but legible, belonged to Sheriff Henry Doran, Lena's predecessor and mentor's mentor. He'd retired in '85 and died 5 years later. Lena leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. A missing woman folded neatly into another family's tragedy. If Evelyn Mercer hadn't died in the fire, then who had Henry Doran seen? She drove out to the Callan homestead that afternoon. The road was little more than 2 ruts between fields, the fence lines swallowed by snowdrifts. The farmhouse stood empty, windows boarded, paint bleached by decades of storms. A faded mailbox still bore her name in peeling black letters. When Lena stepped out of the cruiser, her breath came in white clouds. The wind was low but constant, carrying the faint creak of the barn door swinging in the gusts. Inside, the air smelled of hay and damp wood. Mice scattered as she shone her flashlight across the dirt floor. A few tools remained, rusted gardening shears, a wooden crate stamped Mercer Hardware, Will Saul. She crouched to examine it. The crate was empty except for a single folded paper wedged beneath one corner. It was an old receipt slip, dated July 12, 1976, signed by Robert Mercer for fuel oil delivery. Scrawled in pencil on the back, she said she was going to tell the sheriff. Elena's stomach tightened. She tucked the paper into an evidence sleeve. That evening, back at her office, she called Harris. "Pull the 1976 fire department logs again. I need every name of volunteers on that blaze." A few minutes later, he read the list over the phone. Robert Mercer, deceased. Daniel Mercer, volunteer. Pete Mercer, deceased. Sheriff Doran, and one more. Mary Callan. Lena felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Repeat that." "Mary Callan, civilian volunteer." Harris hesitated. "Says she helped with water supply before the fire broke containment. You think she was there before it started?" "I think she might have been there when it started," Lena said. And Doran knew. The next morning, she drove to Helena to meet Clara Jensen, Mary Callan's niece. Clara was in her late 50s now, living in a modest house on the edge of town, retired school teacher. Her living room smelled of lemon polish and old books. "Mary was my favorite aunt," Clara said, eyes distant. "Always smelled like soap and coffee. When she disappeared, Mama said she must have gone west, but I never believed that. She just bought a new calf the week before." "You don't walk away from something like that." Lena showed her the photograph from the fire, grainy but clear enough to show the blanket-wrapped figure on the stretcher. "Do you recognize anything? Jewelry, clothing?" Clara leaned forward, squinting. Then her hand flew to her mouth. "That bracelet. She wore it every day. Little silver hearts. My uncle made it for her." Lena exhaled slowly. "Would you be willing to give a DNA sample to compare against recovered remains?" Clara nodded, voice trembling. "I've waited 30 years to bring her home." By the end of the week, Dr. Evelyn Cross confirmed it. The unidentified female remains from the Mercer fire matched the Callan family DNA. Mary Callan had died in that cabin. Not Evelyn Mercer. "She was struck from behind," Evelyn said in her lab, pointing to a fracture line on the skull replica. "Same hammer pattern as Robert and Peter Mercer. Defensive wounds on the forearm. She fought hard." Lena stared at the bones, jaw tight. And she was there to help. Likely, Evelyn said. She might have tried to stop the fight, maybe dragged someone out. My guess, she was mistaken for Evelyn in the chaos. The sheriff at the time either didn't know or didn't want to know. Why not? Evelyn sighed. Because admitting he misidentified a body meant admitting he botched the investigation. That night, Lena sat alone in her office, the rain streaking the window again. On her desk lay a photograph she'd taken from the Callan barn. A family snapshot of Mary standing beside a young boy, maybe 10. The back of the photo bore a single word: Ben. She typed the name into the state database. After a minute, a record appeared. Benjamin Callan, age 47, currently employed as a maintenance supervisor at Deer Lodge Penitentiary. Her pulse quickened. The same prison holding Daniel Mercer. The next day, she drove there under gray skies, the wind pressing steady against the highway. The warden arranged the meeting. Benjamin Callan arrived in a blue uniform, sturdy and quiet, eyes sharp beneath his cap. "Sheriff Holt?" he asked. "You said it's about my mother." "She was found," Lena said softly. "She didn't run away. She died trying to help that night at the Mercer cabin." He blinked hard but said nothing. Finally, he whispered, "All my life. I thought she'd left me. I'm sorry." He nodded, staring down at his hands. "You want to know something strange? About 2 months ago, that detective here, Mercer, asked if I could fix a leak in his cell's plumbing. I didn't know who he was at first, but when I saw his name tag, I asked if he'd ever known a woman named Mary Callan. He just froze. Then he said, 'She saved more people than you think.' I thought he was talking nonsense." Lena's breath caught. He remembered her. Ben looked up, eyes glistening. "Did he kill her?" Lena hesitated. "We think his father did." But the old sheriff called it an accident to bury the whole mess. Ben exhaled shakily. "Then please, tell her story right. That's all I want." Driving back through the valley, Lena watched the clouds part above the mountains. The first snow was already dusting the peaks, pale against the slate sky. She thought of Mary Callan, the neighbor who'd tried to stop a storm and been erased for her trouble. She thought of Daniel Mercer in his cell, haunted not just by his own sins, but by those inherited. Justice, she realized, was never a clean line. It was a circle, sometimes closing decades later, sometimes never. She whispered into the hum of the tires, "We're almost there, Mary." Almost. The first snow of winter came early that year, swallowing the ridges around Wilsall in white silence. Sheriff Lena Holt's truck labored through the drifts, tires crunching as she climbed the last stretch of road toward the ruins of the Mercer property. Again. This time she wasn't looking for Becky or Mary. She was looking for Evelyn Mercer, the matriarch whose shadow hung over every discovery but whose body had never been found. A week earlier, after Mary Callan's identification, Lena had requested all remaining evidence from the Mercer estate. Financial ledgers, letters, and an old tin of undeveloped negatives that had sat untouched for decades in a courthouse vault. When the photos came back from processing, one image had stopped her cold. It showed Evelyn Mercer standing beside a stranger outside a roadside motel in Idaho. Dated August 1977, 1 year after the fire. Evelyn was alive. The snow thickened as Lena parked near the same clearing where the cabin had burned 30 years earlier. Her deputy, Harris, climbed out behind her, pulling his scarf tighter. "Got the drone imaging from the surveyor," he said, handing her a tablet. "There's a structure foundation about 200 yards west of here, under the tree line. Could have been an outbuilding, cellar maybe." "Let's see it." They trudged through knee-high snow until the ground dipped into a hollow. The outline of a stone foundation jutted through the frost like bones. At its center yawned a collapsed hatch covered in dead branches. "Looks old," Harris said. "Could date back to the original homestead." Lena crouched, sweeping away snow. Beneath the wood, she saw rusted metal, the corner of a trunk, its hinges fused shut. She scraped the cereal plate clean. The letters read, M. Her pulse quickened. Get me a crowbar. It took 10 minutes of careful prying before the lid gave way with a shriek of metal. Inside were relics of a life packed in a hurry, a pair of women's boots, a threadbare coat, and a small Bible wrapped in cloth. Inside the Bible's cover, in faint cursive, "To my sons, forgive me." Beneath it, a folded stack of letters, brittle but intact. Lena lifted the top one and read, August 5th, 1977. Dear Daniel, if you ever find this, know that I didn't die in that fire. I ran because I couldn't carry what happened. Mary tried to help us, and I failed her. I buried the truth in one lie too many. Robert's rage burned everything, and I was too weak to stop him. But I won't let our family's name end with hate. I'm leaving for Idaho under my maiden name. Someday you'll understand. Lena lowered the letter, snow melting against her gloves. She survived, she whispered. Harris stared at her. So why didn't she ever come back? Lena shook her head. Maybe she tried. 2 days later, Lena sat in the Idaho Vital Records office, the heater rattling against the window. The clerk handed her a microfilm copy of a death certificate. Name, Evelyn Moore. Date of death, March 1989. Cause, pneumonia, natural causes. Next of kin, none listed. It matched the age, the handwriting, the birthplace. She'd changed her name, left Montana, and died quietly in a small town outside Coeur d'Alene. The clerk added, there's a contact address for her burial plot. Cemetery just north of town, unmarked grave. Public section. By evening, Lena stood in that cemetery, the air sharp with frost and pine. Snow muffled the world into stillness. Row after row of headstones leaned like tired shoulders against the dark. Finally, she found it, a small patch of ground marked only by a wooden stake with the number 421. The wind sighed through the pines. She knelt, brushing away snow. Evelyn Mercer, she said softly, you ran to save your son, and he still became what you feared. The silence that followed was not empty but listening. Lena placed the Bible from the trunk at the base of the marker. You can rest now, she whispered. For a long moment, she stayed there, breathing in the cold. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Harris. Harris, got something strange from the property records. Evelyn's Idaho address was paid for by a trust fund. Account holder, Daniel Mercer. Lena stared at the text, stunned. He'd known. She called immediately. You're sure? Positive, Harris said. Bank records show monthly payments to E. Moore until 1989. All from a private account in Bozeman. It's like he was taking care of her in secret. Lena looked back at the grave, the snow swirling in quiet circles. He wasn't lying when he said his mother told him to protect the family. He just never stopped. When she returned to Bozeman, she went straight to Deer Lodge Prison. Mercer was in the infirmary, a touch of pneumonia himself, pale under the harsh light. You found her, he said before she could speak. Lena nodded. She died in Idaho, under her maiden name. You supported her all those years, he smiled faintly. She never forgave herself. Said she couldn't face what happened. She wrote to you. I know. His eyes glistened. She mailed the first letter in 77, told me to burn it. I couldn't. She buried the rest on the property, Lena said. You must have known. I hoped someone would find them when it was time, he said quietly. You were the only one who kept digging. Lena studied him. You could have told me. He looked past her, toward the gray light seeping through the window. Some truths need to come out slow, Sheriff. Otherwise they burn everything left. When she left the infirmary, snow was falling again, soft and steady. She thought about Evelyn Mercer's last words, forgive me, and wondered if that forgiveness had finally reached her son. The Mercer tragedy had begun with silence, but maybe it could end with a voice carried through time. Driving home, Lena turned off the headlights for a moment and let the pale reflection of the snow light her way. The world outside was still, the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from exhaustion after too much pain. But she also felt something else, an almost imperceptible lift in the air, as if a burden had finally left the earth. The dead were finally accounted for. The living had begun to heal. Winter sunlight in Montana carries a strange clarity, sharp, thin, and utterly unforgiving. It reveals everything: the broken fences, the rusted mailboxes, the black scars of old fires under the snow. Sheriff Lena Holt had always thought of it as truth's kind of light. And now, truth was all that remained. The investigation was closing in on its final chapter. Daniel Mercer had confessed, not to murder, but to silence. He admitted to helping bury the evidence of his father's crime, to letting an innocent woman's body be mistaken for his mother's, and to protecting Evelyn after she fled. The prosecution had agreed to reduce his sentence in exchange for cooperation. It wasn't justice in its purest form, but it was the closest thing a small, weary county could afford. Lena sat across from him in the prison's visitation room for the last time. The air smelled faintly of bleach and coffee. Mercer's hands, though thin and pale, still had a craftsman's steadiness when he folded them on the table. "You came back," he said. "I owed you that," Lena replied. "And Mary. And your mother." He studied her for a moment. "They'll all be footnotes now. That's what happens to stories like ours. They fade. Not if I can help it." She slid a folder toward him. Inside were photographs, Mary Callan's bracelet, the recovered letters, and a single image of Evelyn's grave beneath the snow. "You were right about her. She never stopped loving you." Mercer looked at the photograph for a long time. "You know," he said finally, "the night of the fire, she tried to stop my father. Mary came running when she heard the shouting. I remember her coat was half-buttoned. She had this look, like she still believed she could fix everything. And maybe she could have, if Robert hadn't." He stopped himself, the words breaking apart. "She saved you," Lena said gently. "She did," he murmured. "But I saved my mother from the law. And in doing that, I became him." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Sometimes, Sheriff, the worst part of a crime isn't the violence. It's the silence that comes after." The pretending Lena nodded. "That silence ends here." When she left the prison, the sky was the color of pale steel. A gust of wind cut through the courtyard, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel the weight of the case pressing against her chest. Back in Bozeman, the town was easing into the slow rhythm of winter. She stopped by the small diner where Harris sat nursing a coffee. He looked up when she entered. "Heard you finished with Mercer," he said. "Yeah, he's done." Harris slid a newspaper across the counter. The headline read, "1976 Wilsall Fire, officially closed. Sheriff Holt brings resolution to cold case." "Not bad press," he said, grinning faintly. Lena smirked. "They make it sound like I solved something. All I did was listen to ghosts. Sometimes that's the job." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching snow drift against the windows. On the radio, a soft country song played about highways and forgiveness. "You ever wonder why people like that hide so long?" Harris asked. "Mercer's mother, I mean." "She wasn't hiding," Lena said. "She was surviving." "There's a difference." He nodded thoughtfully. "Guess survival has its own kind of guilt." Lena stared out at the street, where a little girl in a red coat tugged her father's hand, laughing as they crossed the slush. "It does," she said quietly. That weekend, Lena drove back to the Mercer property one final time. The county planned to sell the land in the spring, but for now it lay untouched. snow stretching to the tree line, the faint hum of wind through the pines. She parked near the clearing and stepped out, boots crunching over ice. In her hands she carried a small tin box. Inside were copies of Evelyn's letters, a locket from Mary's belongings, and a photograph of the entire Mercer family, long before the fire. She set the box down beside the foundation stones and knelt. "You're all accounted for now," she whispered. "Rest easy." The air felt softer somehow, less accusing. She could almost imagine Evelyn's voice, the low, steady tone of a woman who had finally stopped running. When she stood, the sun had broken through the clouds. The light was blinding on the snow, gold edged with white fire. It spilled across the valley like a benediction. She took one last look at the land, then turned toward her truck. In the months that followed, life settled into the ordinary rhythm of law enforcement again. Stolen trucks, bar fights, the quiet persistence of rural survival. But the case stayed with her. It lingered in dreams, in the smell of smoke on a cold morning, in the glint of sunlight on rusted metal. Some nights, she'd wake from sleep with the sound of a woman's voice in her ears, Mary's maybe, or Evelyn's, saying, "Tell the truth, even if it hurts." And Lena would whisper back into the dark, "I did." On the first thaw of spring, she visited the small memorial the town had built at the edge of Will's Saul. 3 stones stood in a circle, engraved with the names of the fire's victims: Robert Mercer, Peter Mercer, Mary Callan, and beneath them, finally, Evelyn Mercer, 1928 to 1989. A 4th plaque had been added at Lena's request, dedicated to the persistence of truth and those who speak for the lost. She laid a single sprig of wild sage across the base and stepped back. The snowmelt ran in rivulets down the hillside, carrying away the last ash of an old tragedy. For a long moment she simply stood there, eyes closed, letting the wind wash over her. The pain, the secrets, the endless questions, all of it had settled into something quieter, something bearable. When she finally turned to leave, the sunlight followed her down the hill, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the valley itself could breathe again. 15 years passed. By the time spring returned to Gallatin County in 2023, Sheriff Lena Holt's badge hung on a hook in her study, its edges dulled by time. She'd retired 2 years earlier, trading long drives through stormlight for morning walks with her dog and quiet coffee in the back garden. The Mercer case had become one of those rare local legends that small towns never quite stopped telling. True crime podcasts dissected it. University students wrote papers about intergenerational guilt in rural America, and television specials replayed grainy photographs of the burned cabin under solemn narration. But for Lena, the story had never been about infamy. It was about the silences that destroy families and the rare moments when someone breaks them. That afternoon she sat by the window, the newspaper folded beside her. Her eyes had begun to fade a little, but she could still make out the headline of the small article that had drawn her attention. Lucia Mercer speaks out. From captivity to advocacy. The photo showed a woman in her early 40s standing before a crowd at the state capitol, composed and strong. In her hands, she held a small silver bracelet. Becky's, recovered after 32 years. Irene had become an advocate for families of the missing and long-term cold cases. She'd moved to Helena, founded a small nonprofit, and pushed for stronger victim support laws. In interviews, she never spoke of her captor by name. Instead, she talked about recovery, the long, uneven road toward remembering yourself after years of being told who you are. Lena smiled faintly. The woman Lena had once met in a diner booth, fingers wrapped around a cold cup of tea, now looked the world in the face and spoke anyway. A soft knock sounded at the door. Harris stepped in, gray-haired now but still broad-shouldered, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You still reading those old clippings?" he asked, setting one mug down. "Just this one," she said, tapping the photo of Lucia. He glanced at it, nodding. She's doing good work. Guess that's what happens when truth finally catches up. Lena sipped her coffee, the taste grounding her. You ever think about how close we came to missing it all? If that junkyard owner hadn't called, if we dismissed that old car as scrap? Then someone else would have found it, Harris said. Truth has a nasty habit of surfacing when it's ready. He leaned against the doorway, watching the late sunlight scatter across her bookshelves. You ever miss it? The work. Sometimes, she admitted, but I don't miss the weight. Some cases stay on your shoulders forever. Harris smiled softly. You carried it well. Lena didn't answer. She just looked out the window where the lilacs had started to bloom again. Later that evening, she drove out to the Wilsall Memorial. The road was smoother now, the town a little larger, but the valley still opened the same way, wide and solemn, the mountains standing like sentinels over everything that had come before. The memorial stones were clean, the engraving sharp from a recent restoration. At the base of Evelyn Mercer's stone sat a bouquet of wildflowers and a handwritten note sealed in plastic. Lena knelt to read it. For my mother, who taught me that love survives even our worst mistakes. For Mary, who tried to save us. For those who kept digging. Lucia. Beside the bouquet lay a small charm bracelet, silver hearts glinting faintly in the sun. Lena closed her eyes. In the silence, she thought she could hear laughter carried faintly on the wind. Children's voices somewhere in the distance. Maybe memory was just another kind of echo, one that never truly faded. She rose slowly, brushing snowmelt from her knees, and looked across the empty fields. It struck her then that the land no longer felt haunted. It simply felt alive, the kind of quiet that follows confession when the past has finally stopped whispering. Driving home through the valley, she saw the last light of day spill across the mountains, gold and cold. She rolled down the window, letting the wind sweep through her hair. At a red light in town, her phone buzzed with a text from Irene. Thank you for finding us. I still carry Becky's bracelet. It reminds me that even buried things can survive. Lena smiled, tears blurring the lights outside. She typed back slowly, keep carrying it. The past belongs to those who tell it. When she reached home, the dog greeted her at the door, tail wagging. She set the badge back on the shelf beside a framed photo, her, Harris, and a much younger Irene, standing in front of the restored memorial 10 years earlier. Outside, the night settled deep and clear over the valley. Stars emerged one by one, bright and unblinking. Lena poured a final cup of coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and watched her breath drift into the cold air. So much had begun with fire, but it had ended with light. And for the first time in her long life of chasing ghosts, she felt something close to peace.